Hello, everybody. I feel like I start every episode off the same way.
Except for this time.
Except for this time. What do you mean?
Well, you just said, I feel like I started off the same way, which is a different way of starting it off.
Oh, my goodness. I'm Strati Papa Giorgio.
And I'm Father Michael Tischel.
And we are
an Imperfect
Podcast.
Cue music. So,
how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah.
You know, rejoicing in the afternoon slump.
Yeah.
Coffeeless slump.
Oh, yeah?
No coffee.
I've had
coffee this
3
morning. Really? That's impressive. You look pretty normal.
Do I?
Yeah.
As far as normal.
Well, yeah.
For me is.
Yeah. You don't look like you're just like.
Oh, yeah, no, it doesn't really affect me as much as
That's impressive.
All that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, aging. From what I understand, we're going to talk about aging.
Yes.
And I mean, what a timeless, pun intended,
timeless, timely
topic. Which none of us can escape.
Right.
You know, aging in my own. I'm not that old. Neither are you, Father.
Yeah.
But we're not kids either.
Right.
You know, and I think for me it's always interesting. Like when I go and I look in the mirror and I see the white hairs, and I'm just like, look at that. Isn't that neat?
That's your response. My response is a little different.
Really? It doesn't bother me that much. I mean,
no, it doesn't bother me either.
Yeah.
It's very there's something dignified about having more hairs.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I look at it and go, oh, look at that.
Aging.
That wasn't there before. That wasn't there 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. 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 It's kind of interesting just to think about like what our experience of time is in relation to our own finite existence. I mean, we're not, at least as far as our current existence, we're not going to be here forever. Everybody goes into that mystery of that we call death, and nobody makes it out alive. And we so much of life is, whether we're conscious of it or not, is sort of based on facing that progressive shortening of our existence here on Earth and kind of getting to that.
I think that also crosses my mind when I see the white hairs. That also like there's a little whisper of,
it's getting closer.
It's getting
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, kinda.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, it is. And if this is a really depressing episode.
Well, yeah.
It shouldn't be.
No, it is.
Okay. I was trying to bring it back up, but all right.
It's very depressing.
Well, it's not. It shouldn't be.
No.
It shouldn't be depressing, but as human beings, we always see death as depressing.
Terrifying.
And
depressing.
terrifying, yeah.
Yeah. Because there is that major element of just it being completely unknown.
Right.
And not having any sense. I mean, we have insights through Scripture, through the revealed truth of our faith, through certain firsthand accounts of people, dying and coming back or something like that, of like what things could be like. But ultimately, it's definitely a veil that we are often not able to penetrate. And so here we are faced with this crazy reality, and how do we live?
Not to keep drumming the scary part of all of that, right? But I remember I remember hearing a story of an elder, probably on Mount Athos, where he actually experienced what it was like to die. He didn't die, but he was given the taste of the moment of death, and it was terrifying.
Wow.
You're all welcome.
Good story, Strati. I really appreciate that.
I know. I mean, why would anybody tell anybody that? Like,
no, that's great. Yeah, it's like on the one hand you have this just terrifying reality. On the other hand, what is on the other hand? No. On the other hand, there is, there is this other aspect which I had heard about, and then I think I've experienced to a certain extent, which is to say, as life moves on, and you start to taste your own mortality in the sense that you realize, oh gosh, like this body that I've been given, is not going to hold up forever, and I'm not just going to keep floating along here, just doing whatever I want to do. And you actually start to realize that in a kind of an internal sort of way, it can have an opposite effect. There can be this effect where it's like, well, I want to live that much more. Yeah. Because I know I'm going to die, I want to experience life that much more.
Correct.
There's this like yearning for life in the face of death.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just have this sort of sense that you're going to live forever in this earthly existence, then you're just like, life's okay. It's kind of blah, right? But if you knew that there was if you really, really got it, that there was going to be this final end to your existence as you know it, then it sort of heightens your sensitivity to life.
Yeah, and I agree.
Yeah.
But there's also like people are fickle, right? Like there's also like the opposite.
Pickle.
There's also the opposite sort of thing where like a young person doesn't take into consideration at all that there will be death,
right?
And does not so wise things,
right?
Because it doesn't compute.
Yeah.
So both I think could happen almost. Where you don't even take into account that you're going to die.
Right.
That made sense?
Well...
Did that make sense
just then? So you're saying that they don't take that into account, they try to live their life?
Yeah. They do live it, not like with that realization, not with any sort of revelation, but rather just like mindlessly almost. Just going about and doing things that are not the best...
for them. Well, that's kind of what I'm saying is just in general.
Right.
The less... In some ways, you'd sort of think or feel that being aware of your mortality would sort of depress you and make you... and kind of zap you of any motivation to do anything in life because you're sort of like, well, what's the point? If I'm just going to die anyway.
Right.
But... paradoxically, I think what it does for a lot of people is it actually heightens their desire and their motivation.
That probably happens, later. Not too long later. It depends on the person, I suppose.
Yeah.
I would imagine that the 15-year-old isn't quite thinking that way. Maybe they are.
Sure.
But they're probably generally not thinking about their own mortality in a mature way, anyway.
Unless they're faced with it.
Unless they have faced it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It is brilliantly.
It's almost if we go to the primordial sort of source of death, with Adam and Eve, death was almost a gift out of the suffering of this world.
Sure.
If you want to go in a theological way of death, it was like, you're going to live through this life that's suffering. Don't worry. It ends too.
Right.
Again, could sound depressing, but it isn't depressing.
No, it's
the same time. Like not to say wait, just can't, like, you shouldn't, like, what am I trying to say? Like, I'm not saying I can't wait to die.
Right.
But I'm also saying that as much as we cling to life, it will end, and it's also not the end of life as well. And that's also a gift, because at the end of the day, we do suffer,
right?
No matter what, no matter what happens in your life, you're gonna go through some pain and suffering.
What if we thought about life after death not in terms of chronology,
sure,
but in terms of geography? In other words, rather than saying life after death, we could say something like life behind death. And death is sort of like what our whole earthly existence is tainted by.
Yeah.
So sort of like everything about our earthly existence, especially our separation from God, is somehow affected by death, right? So that means that there's a life behind all of that, underneath all of that, behind all of that, that beyond all of that, that is not affected by that.
Correct. Yeah.
So in that sense, I think there's that sort of changes, it reframes things, not so much in terms of I just have to wait until I die, right? But right here and now, my life is affected by death, is affected by my mortality, is affected by this kind of linear aging process, is affected by sin and corruption and imperfection and all that stuff, right? So that's part of the fabric of my reality. But that behind all of that, through the veil of all of that, is this perfect, infinite, eternal existence, which is God, basically.
Yeah.
And that I can experience God through all of the messiness here and now.
Yeah.
And that can take me into, so in other words, eternity is now.
Is now, yeah.
And can be experienced now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's...
Yeah, people say so often, people say a lot of things. But, like, I've heard, well, we might as well believe, you never know, right? But the counter to that would be, well, you can know from now.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait until you die to find out if it were true or not.
Sure. Yeah. And I think there is that sense that we can receive some sort of assurance of the reality of life beyond the matrix of death, you could say, here and now. It's assurance, as we were talking about last week, is different than this kind of like hard and fast certainty. It's a sense of a connection with the presence of God, who is shy on one level, who doesn't sort of...
He's not in your face.
He's not in your face. He's the still small voice, right? He departs when you're filled with yourself, and comes when you're, when you're sort of more simple and humble. But that presence, to follow up from last week, is sort of breaks through the brokenness and the imperfection and the deadness of what can often feel like our current reality, the mundaneness, the restlessness, the boredom, the tedium, all of those things, and allows us to experience this life that has no time that associated with it. It's not this kind of linear thing. It's this we're just sort of in this reality of this presence that's sort of the fullness of everything, and time ceases to exist. It's beyond all that. We've kind of passed through it. And so, it's so different, I think, in many ways than this whole very childish perspective. I would call it a childish perspective that, I have this blind faith in life after death, and so I'm just going to kind of wait it out and hope that once I pass through that, I will, It's kind of like when Lazarus died in the Gospel of John, and I think, was it Mary who ran to Jesus Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus?
Yeah.
I think it was Mary who ran to him to tell him that her brother died, or was it Martha? I can't remember which one.
Somebody told him, and then he went.
Right, but then
and found them there. Or did they
well,
come?
one of them ran out to meet him.
Right. That's what I.
Yeah, and then said, you know,
if
Lord,
you were here.
Yeah, if you were here, my brother wouldn't have died. And he said, well, he's going to rise from the dead. And she said, well, yes, Lord, I know that he'll rise from the dead in the second coming, or in the final general resurrection, whatever.
Yeah.
And he said, I am the resurrection. I think that's such a beautiful, like,
yeah,
you know, like,
that's exactly that the resurrection is now.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
the truth is now.
She was thinking about this future.
Right.
Consolation, this future
which
event,
she thought he was talking about.
Which she thought he was talking about. That's where her mind went.
Which would have been really, it would have been almost not pompous, but almost, what's the word? Kind of.
Yeah, like a kind of like a cold comfort.
Cold comfort.
Yeah,
like, oh, don't worry,
he's gonna rise again in thousands of years.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Right. We'll see him again.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Way down.
That would have been really
line.
Yeah. But he wasn't saying that. He was saying, no, he's actually gonna rise like today in like 10 minutes.
Right. And then that's why I think, you know, religion in the kind of like childish manifestation, in the way that we sort of think about it when we're kids, when we've been taught about heaven and hell and our relationship with God and life after death and all these things. All of these things are still bound by our very human understanding of time and space. You know, like heaven is going to be this palace, you know, this material palace, or you know, this kind of floating on the clouds or whatever, all these caricatures that we have in our minds. Hell, we're going to be, you know, skewered and, you know, barbecued alive, whatever, you know. All these,
hopefully
you know,
not.
Yeah. Well, but even that, I mean, Dostoevsky talks about hell. He said he said hell is the experience of never being able to love or be loved, and which starts even now. And he said that kind of experience, if you really we're going to experience that for the rest of your life, then even physical fire would feel like a consolation to you.
Yeah.
To that kind of pain.
Yeah.
That kind of existential pain. So it's like, talk about like that is way worse than any kind of physical being barbecued alive. Anyway, all that to say that, you know, I think the most convincing or compelling or consoling, you know, promise or, you know, experience that we could have is this sense that life after death, that eternity, that all these things, that heaven, that God are all of these things, that phenomena that we talk about, which are all really united in one, that is to say, the presence of God and the reality of God, that God is available to us here and now.
Yeah.
And that aging, while we still experience aging, and because we're not able to sustain this experience of the presence of God on a kind of very constant basis, we still experience the reality of aging, but in this kind of quiet way, we also experience the presence of something beyond all of that.
Yeah.
That gives us this hope that once the aging ends, that we'll be more fully able to commune with eternal life, with God.
Yeah. I mean, I really like it. Just got really, like, what's the word? Contemplative right now, you know? Because it's a really personal, I mean, for everybody, right?
Yeah.
You know, nobody escapes it. You know, nobody escapes it.
No.
I mean, not even the Virgin Mary. She did die, right? She was the most holy.
Right.
She, you know, even she died.
Yep. So,
well, I think, because this is going to be a very short one.
Yeah.
And we just dumped a bunch of thought on everybody.
Yep.
But that's not bad. I think that's good. Give you all a little bit to think about.
Yep.
Give us something to think about. I know I'm thinking.
Me too.
It'll be a few weeks until our next one.
Yeah.
Because
I'm going to be heading out to Thessaloniki to do some work on my PhD there, and we'll be coming back in a couple weeks.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah. If you go to any places, send me pictures.
I will.
Of the churches.
Yeah, I will.
If you go to Saint Paisios,
I will try to do that for sure. Certainly, I'll be at Saint Demetrios, the Church of Saint Demetrios, and some of the main ones in the city. Yeah. All
right, everyone. Well, I think with that, we're going to end this very short episode of an Imperfect Podcast.
But it reminds us of the brevity of life. And
he said it better than I could. All right. Take care, everyone.
Have a great life.